Some men snap. They flip tables, raise their voices, make scenes that end up on somebody's phone and eventually on the internet for strangers to dissect over breakfast. I am not that man. My name is Michael Anderson. I am 53 years old. I manage warehouse logistics in Columbus, Ohio. I drive a 2014 Ford F-150 with a cracked rearview mirror that I keep meaning to fix, and never do. I eat the same turkey sandwich for lunch every single weekday, because I decided at some point in my 40s that I liked it, and life is too short to second-guess a good sandwich. I also wrote a check for $42,000 so my daughter could have the wedding she always dreamed of. She used that wedding to tell 200 people I was a punchline, and I just sat there, smiled, adjusted my clip-on tie. I didn't know then that the most satisfying moment of my entire life was less than 30 minutes away. Welcome back to Dad's Sweet Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, every villain in these stories thought they were the smartest person in the room. They were not. Subscribe so you never miss a story. Sophia, my daughter, 26 years old, sharp as broken glass and twice as dangerous, got engaged to Ethan Carter on a Thursday evening in November. Ethan was a good man. Solid, measured, the kind of guy who looked you in the eye when he shook your hand and actually meant it. He worked in corporate finance, wore pressed shirts without being told to, and looked at Sophia the way a man should look at the woman he intends to spend his life with, like she was both the best thing that ever happened to him and the most terrifying. I liked him from the first dinner. My wife Emily squeezed my arm when Ethan pulled out the ring and whispered, "Don't say anything weird." When do I ever say anything weird? Patient expression of a woman who has been married to me for 19 years and has a very thorough archive. The thing at Thanksgiving, she said. That was one time. The thing at Sophia's graduation, that was taken completely out of context. Michael. Fine. She turned back toward the happy couple. I did too. Sophia was crying the good kind of tears, the kind that make mascara irrelevant because nobody's looking at your face, they're looking at your hands. Ethan was holding both of them. My mother, Ava, seated on my other side, patted my knee without looking at me. "You're going to write the check," she said quietly. "I know." "How much?" "However much she needs." Ava nodded once, like that settled something she'd been privately debating. Knowing her, it probably had. 2 weeks later, Sophia sat across from me at the kitchen table. Our kitchen table. Mine and Emily's. The one with the water ring from a coffee mug I'd never gotten around to buffing out. And she folded her hands in that particular way she had since she was a child. Very still, very deliberate. The posture of a woman about to ask for something significant, and having already decided she deserved it. "Dad, I found the venue." "Okay. It's called Willowbrook Estate. It has a garden for the ceremony and a ballroom for the reception." And she pulled out her phone and turned it toward me. I looked at the photos. Rolling green lawns, white pavilion, enormous windows overlooking a sculpted garden, the kind of place that made you feel underdressed in the parking lot. "How much?" I asked. $38,000 for the venue and catering together. I did the math without showing it on my face. $38,000 was almost exactly what sat in the account I'd been quietly building since Sophia was 12 years old. The account I'd never told her about. The one I started the year after Emily and I got married, when I sat down one Sunday morning with a yellow legal pad and wrote at the top, "Things I want to make sure of." Sophia's future was the first item on the list. "I can do it," I said. Her composure cracked, just for a second, but I saw it. The little girl who used to fall asleep on the couch watching cartoons was right there behind the carefully constructed adult face, and she was so relieved she almost couldn't stand it. She came around the table and hugged me with both arms. "Thank you, Daddy." She hadn't called me that in years. I hugged her back and didn't say anything because some moments don't need commentary. I added $4,000 for flowers and a DJ. $42,000 total. I handed her the check inside a birthday card because it was the only envelope in the house. She laughed at the card. I laughed too. Emily found me in the kitchen afterward, washing out my coffee mug. "You used the whole account," she said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, then. Good. That was it. That was Emily. 19 years of marriage, and she still had the ability to say exactly the right thing in exactly the fewest possible words. I didn't know then what that check would mean by the end of April. Here's something you should understand about Sophia and me, before we get to the part where things fall apart. We love each other. I want to be precise about that because what happens later could make it sound otherwise. And it isn't otherwise. It's just complicated in the particular way that fathers and daughters can be complicated when there's been a divorce involved. And a lot of miles in a story one of them has been telling herself for longer than she realizes. Sophia's mother and I split when Sophia was 14. What matters is that after the divorce, Sophia lived with me in Columbus during the school year and spent summers with her mother, who had moved to a bigger city and built a bigger life with a bigger house and a man with a more impressive job title. I'm not bitter about that. I understood it. People make their choices and build their lives, and sometimes those lives look very different from the lives they left behind. What I didn't fully account for was what it does to a child to grow up measuring two households against each other. My household was a 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet neighborhood. Barbecue on Sundays. The F-150. Friday nights watching whatever game was on. Emily's cooking, which was legitimately extraordinary but would never photograph well for social media. Comfortable, predictable. Mine. Her mother's household, from what Sophia described over the years, involved vacations to places I'd need to look up on a map, and dinner parties in a kitchen that had been professionally renovated twice. I didn't resent any of it. What I didn't see, what I was too close to notice, was that Sophia had quietly started categorizing me, filing me under a specific label. Working class dad. Simple man. The one you visit out of love, not aspiration. By her mid-20s, she developed this way of talking to me. Not cruel, not yet. More like patient. Like I was a beloved old appliance that still functioned but required gentle handling. She'd correct things I said at dinner, not because they were wrong, but because she had a more sophisticated version. She'd explain things to me in the careful cadence of someone speaking to a person who might not quite keep up. Emily saw it before I named it. She manages you, Emily said one night. Not unkindly, just factually, the way she said hard things. She's assertive. She interrupted you 4 times at dinner, Michael. She's passionate about the topic. Emily looked at me, the long, knowing look of a woman who has the full picture and is deciding how much of it to share at once. You gave her $42,000, she said. And she still talks to you like you need supervision. I didn't have an answer. I turned off the lamp and went to sleep. But the sentence stayed with me like a splinter. Small, invisible, persistently present. I didn't know yet just how right Emily was about to be proven, or how publicly. The wedding was the last Saturday of April. A warm evening. The sky doing that particular thing it does in late spring, where the light goes golden before it goes dark, and everything looks slightly more cinematic than it actually is. Willowbrook Estate was everything the photographs had promised, and then some. The garden ceremony was set under a white pavilion strung with lights. The ballroom was all tall windows and candlelight and floral arrangements so elaborate, I briefly wondered if I'd underfunded the flowers. 200 guests filled the space. Ethan had a large, warm family, and Sophia had spent a decade curating an impressive social world. Emily and I arrived and found our seats, table 4 near the back. I noted this with the specific dry amusement of a man who had just signed the venue's largest check. Table 4, I said to Emily. Don't. I'm just noting the location. I know what you're noting. Don't. I sat down. She sat beside me, beautiful in the deep burgundy dress she'd bought on sale, and hemmed herself on our kitchen table 3 nights before the wedding. I told her she looked incredible. She told me my tie was crooked. It's a clip-on, I said. It doesn't go crooked. And yet, my mother Ava found us just before the ceremony began, and settled into the seat on my other side, already emotional, already reaching for my arm. She's going to be beautiful, Ava said. She is, I said. You look like you might cry. I won't. Your father cried at every wedding he ever attended. I know. I was there for most of them. She patted my arm and faced forward. The music began. Sophia walked down the aisle and I was right. She was beautiful. The dress was something I couldn't have described technically, but understood immediately. She looked like herself, fully realized the best version. Ethan Carter stood at the end of the aisle, and when he saw her his face did something unguarded and genuine, and I thought, good, that's the right reaction. That's the man I said yes to. He cried during the vows, the good kind of crying, the kind that makes you respect a man rather than worry about him. I did not cry. I had decided I wouldn't, and I have very good discipline about the things I decide. The reception opened at 6. The ballroom filled fast. Dinner was served at 7. Prime rib and salmon, both excellent. I had the prime rib. Emily had the salmon. My mother Ava had both, which I respected enormously. At table 3, directly beside us, sat Mr. Thompson, Ethan's direct supervisor at Meridian Capital. He was mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of man whose watch told you his tax bracket before he said a word. He arrived with quiet authority, and settled in with the ease of someone accustomed to being the most significant person in most rooms. I noticed him. I did not think much about him. Not yet. I didn't know what he was carrying. The toasts began around 8. Ethan's best man went first. Energetic, slightly nervous, 3 inside jokes that landed for about 8 people and a toast that landed for everyone. Fine. Good. Normal wedding material. Then Jessica stood up. Jessica was Sophia's closest friend. They'd known each other since college, the kind of friendship forged in shared hardship and late nights that outlasts almost everything. She was funny and warm and told a story about Sophia that made the whole room laugh and then got quiet in just the right way. She raised her glass and meant it. Then Sophia stood up. I want to say I felt something shift, some animal instinct, some cold forewarning. But honestly, I didn't. I was just a father watching his daughter pick up a microphone at her own wedding, and I was proud, and I thought, this is the moment I'll remember most. I was right about that, just not for the reason I expected. I want to talk about family, Sophia began. Her voice was clear and confident. She'd always been a composed speaker. Even as a kid, she'd never been rattled by an audience. Because family is complicated, isn't it? Warm laughter, knowing nods. I grew up between 2 worlds. She smiled out at the room. My mother gave me ambition. She showed me what it meant to want more, to reach further, to refuse to accept the ceiling you were handed. Appreciative murmurs. I was still smiling, still proud. And then there was my dad. She looked at me. My dad is a warehouse manager. He drives a truck that's older than some of the people in this room. Light laughter. I kept smiling. He wore a clip-on tie to my wedding. Louder laughter. I glanced down. Guilty as charged. I'd never learned the real kind and had reached a point in my 40s where I decided this was a character trait rather than a deficiency. Growing up, my dad's idea of a big vacation was a long weekend at a state park. His idea of fine dining was a chain restaurant where they bring you bread before the meal. She paused, letting the chuckles build. He's a simple man. A very, very simple man. Something changed in Emily's hand on the table beside mine. Her fingers found my wrist. I kept the smile. Because I knew, I was certain, I knew where this was going. The self-deprecating setup was just the runway. Any moment now she'd pull the pivot. But this simple man was always there. But this simple man showed me what really mattered. That was the template. That was the move. Sophia didn't make the move. I've had to come to terms with my roots, she continued pleasantly. We don't choose where we come from. We don't choose our circumstances. We only choose what we do with them. She smiled at Ethan with a warmth that was entirely genuine. And I am so grateful to be building something new, something better. She raised her glass. To Ethan's family, who showed me what ambition looks like when it's inherited. To Jessica, for 11 years of friendship that made me who I am. And to everyone in this room who helped make today possible. She did not say my name. She did not mention the check. The room applauded, and a few people near us did the quick, uncomfortable glance. The one people do when they've witnessed something slightly cruel and can't process it fast enough to respond. I saw it at the table to the right. I saw it in the careful stillness of my mother Ava beside me. Emily's hand was a vice around my wrist. I took a sip of water. I was not going to flip a table. I was not going to stand up and announce to 200 people that I had written a $42,000 check and received a punchline in return. I was not going to cry, or shout, or make my daughter's wedding the night her father made a scene. I just sat there, smiled, adjusted my clip-on tie, and I did not notice, not yet, that Mr. Thompson at table 3 had gone completely, unnervingly still. Here is what I have learned about quiet people over 53 years. The world underestimates them systematically and pays for it eventually. Sophia had spent years underestimating me. What she hadn't accounted for was that the room contained a man who knew something the rest of them didn't. A man who had been sitting 12 inches to my left all evening, eating his prime rib, carrying 11 years of information like a card in his breast pocket, waiting, without even knowing he was waiting, for the moment to play it. Mr. Thompson set down his wine glass. He leaned slightly toward the woman beside him and said something quiet. She looked at him with wide eyes and nodded once. Then he pushed back his chair and stood up. He was unhurried, completely, almost unsettlingly calm, the way men are calm when they have nothing to prove and have simply decided something needs to be said. He walked to the front of the room. The DJ, confused, handed him the microphone without being asked. "I apologize for the interruption," Thompson said. The room quieted immediately. There was something in his voice that made rooms do that. "My name is Thompson. I'm Ethan's direct supervisor at Meridian Capital, and I've had the genuine pleasure of watching this young man build a career worth watching." He nodded once at Ethan, who looked simultaneously grateful and bewildered. "But I'm not standing up here to talk about Ethan." A pause, long enough to matter. "I'm standing up here because I heard a name tonight that I was not expecting to hear, and I've sat with it for about 20 minutes, and I've decided I cannot in good conscience stay in my seat." Still smiling. She probably thought this was another toast, another tribute, another perfectly choreographed moment in her perfectly choreographed evening. "Michael Anderson," Thompson said. 200 heads turned. I sat very still. "When the father of the bride was introduced to me earlier this evening," Thompson continued, "I almost couldn't finish my dinner, because I know that name. I have known that name for 11 years, and I have been trying to place it all night, and about 20 minutes ago during that speech it clicked. 11 years ago, a logistics routing system called Anchar entered the market. It was licensed quietly, sold quietly, and eventually acquired twice over. I was on the board of the company that made the second acquisition." He let that settle. "Anchor was, and I want to be precise here because I've worked with a great many systems in 25 years. Anchor was one of the most elegant pieces of operational architecture I have ever encountered. Genuinely. We deployed it across 11 distribution networks. It employed efficiencies that our own engineers spent 2 years trying to reverse engineer before they finally just accepted it and built on top of it." He looked at me directly. The man who designed and built Anchar from scratch, on his own time, on his own initiative while working a full-time job, is sitting at table 4, in a clip-on tie. Let me tell you what Anchar was and why I never told Sophia about it. I built it over 4 years, starting when Sophia was around 15. Nights and weekends, a second-hand laptop, every textbook and logistics paper I could get from the Columbus Public Library. It wasn't glamorous. There was no founding moment, no eureka, no investor meeting in a glass-walled conference room. It was just a man who understood from 14 years of warehouse work that the way goods moved through distribution systems was deeply unnecessarily inefficient, and who believed stubbornly that he could model something better. I called it Anchor because I needed a name for the files, and that was the word that came to me at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and I never changed it. I licensed it to 3 regional distributors in Ohio in the first year. Modest revenue. The system worked. Word got to the right people. In year 3, a Pittsburgh logistics firm bought the licensing rights outright. I made enough to pay off my house and fund the account I'd eventually use for Sophia's wedding. In year 4, the full intellectual property, Anchor itself, every component, was acquired by a national supply chain company. I signed the paperwork on a Wednesday morning and drove to a chain restaurant afterward, because I felt like celebrating in exactly the way I felt like celebrating, and nobody else was involved. Then, I went back to the warehouse on Monday. I never told Sophia. I have thought carefully about why, and the honest answer has a few layers. One layer is that the money was just money. It didn't change who I was, and I'd already decided who I was. A simpler layer is that I was a father raising a teenager, and announcing a business deal felt like exactly the wrong energy for that season of our lives. But the deepest, truest layer, the one I admitted to myself only much later, was that I was afraid. Not of her dismissing it, of her reducing it, of watching her absorb the information and file it under the wrong heading. I didn't want Anchor to become evidence in a case she was building about who I should have been. I wanted it to stay mine. So it stayed mine. What I did not know, what I had absolutely no way of knowing, was that Anchor had been acquired a second time, 3 years after my sale. That it had been scaled, developed, and integrated into a national logistics framework. That it was now a foundational component of systems used by Meridian Capital's portfolio companies. That the man sitting 12 inches to my left had been on the board of the company that made that second acquisition. That he knew exactly what it was. That he knew exactly who had built it. The man who built Anchor, Thompson continued, his voice steady and precise, did not build it in a university lab or a funded startup. He built it in his spare time while managing a warehouse by day. He licensed it without a press release. And then, Thompson paused, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like genuine admiration. He went back to work on Monday morning like none of it had happened. A sound moved through the room, not laughter, something quieter and more complicated. "I have spent 25 years in finance and investment," Thompson said. "I have met builders who required an audience for every brick they laid. I have met men who needed the credit more than they needed the result." He looked at me steadily. "Michael Anderson is not that man." Landing like stones. He built something real. He used what it earned to give his daughter this wedding. And then he sat at table 4 and smiled while she called him simple. The room went absolutely still. I was looking at the tablecloth. I made myself look up. "I want to say one thing directly to Michael Anderson." Thompson's voice had not risen once. He was not performing. He was just saying what he had decided needed to be said. "Sir, Ancher employed efficiencies that improved supply chains serving hundreds of thousands of people. The work you did mattered. Enormously. And the fact that you never needed anyone in this room to know about it." He stopped, looked around the room slowly, then back at me. "That is not what a simple man does," he said. "That is what an extraordinary one does." He set the microphone down. The room erupted. The applause started at the back and rolled forward like a slow tide. My mother Ava made a sound beside me, something between a sob and a war cry, the noise of a woman who has always known the full picture and has just watched the rest of the world catch up. Emily didn't say anything. She just pressed her forehead briefly against my shoulder and stayed there for a moment. I could feel her shaking, not crying, laughing. The deep, quiet laughter of a woman who has been right for a very long time and is finally completely, publicly vindicated. I looked at Sophia. She was not applauding. She was sitting at the head table with her champagne glass still halfway to her lips, frozen there, the color draining from her face in a slow and visible tide. The posture of a woman doing rapid, unwilling mathematics. The clip-on tie, the state park vacations, the chain restaurant celebrations, the F-150 with the cracked mirror, the $42,000 check. Ancher. Ethan leaned toward her and said something quietly. She didn't respond. She was still running the numbers, and the numbers were dismantling everything she'd spent years building. Ethan caught my eye across the room. He looked devastated, not for himself, but for what he'd just watched his wife do to her father in public. He mouthed something. I was fairly sure it was "I'm so sorry." I gave him a small nod. He wasn't the problem. He never had been. People stopped by the table. Strangers. Faces I'd never seen. Pumping my hand, saying things I received with as much grace as I could manage. Thompson himself came over, brief and genuine, and we shook hands. He told me the work had mattered. I told him I appreciated it more than I could easily express, which was the exact and complete truth. Jessica caught my eye from across the room. She held my gaze for a long moment, the look of a woman who loved Sophia deeply, had watched this coming from further away than anyone realized, and didn't know what to do with either of those things. She gave me a small, pained nod. I nodded back. About 15 minutes after Thompson sat down, Sophia appeared at my elbow. I looked up, and there she was. The composure she'd spent 26 years perfecting had finally cracked. Not dramatically. Sophia didn't do dramatic unless she planned it. But the cracks were there. 2 real tears had made it down her face before she could manage them. Her hands were clasped in front of her, the way they'd been at the kitchen table when she asked for the check. Composed. Deliberate. But this time, afraid. "Dad," she said. Her voice was small. I hadn't heard it that small since she was a child. I looked at her. I didn't say anything. "I didn't know about Angkor," she said. "I swear to you, I didn't know. I know you didn't. Why didn't you tell me?" I was alone at the table, and I took a slow breath, and I looked at my daughter the way you look at something you've been carrying for a long time, and have finally decided to set down. "Because it was mine," I said, "and I didn't need you to validate it." She flinched, just slightly. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I thought I was being funny. I genuinely thought." "Sophia." My voice was level, quiet, the way it gets when I mean every word. "You stood at a microphone at a wedding I paid for, in a venue I paid for, wearing flowers I paid for, in front of 200 people, and you used that moment to tell them I was simple." I paused. "You didn't do that by accident. You did it because somewhere you have always believed it. Tonight you just finally said it out loud." Her jaw tightened. Another tear broke free. That's not fair. You called me simple in front of my coworkers, in front of your grandmother. I glanced toward where Ava was sitting, still dabbing her eyes. In front of my wife. I know. I know what I did. That's why I'm standing here. You're standing here, I said, because a man at the next table happened to know something about me that changed the room's opinion. If Thompson hadn't stood up, if Anchor had stayed quiet the way I kept it, you'd have gone to bed tonight proud of that speech. The truth of it hit her face like a cold wind. I watched her want to deny it and find she couldn't. I'm sorry, she said again. And this time it was smaller, more real. The apology of someone who has just looked at themselves clearly and doesn't like what they found. I know you are, I said. Can you forgive me? And there it was, the question. The one she'd come over here to get answered. The resolution she needed so she could close this chapter and move forward into her shiny new life with her conscience settled. I looked at my daughter for a long moment, at the dress I'd paid for, at the venue visible through the ballroom windows, at the tears that had only arrived once the room turned. No, I said. The word landed quietly. No heat, no raised voice. Just a door, closing. She blinked. What? Not tonight, I said. Maybe not for a long time. I picked up my water glass and held it without drinking. Forgiveness isn't something you get because you ask for it at the right moment, Sophia. It's something that gets built back slowly, over time, through different choices. I set the glass down. You haven't made any different choices yet. You've only just found out that being cruel to me had witnesses who knew better. The color that had drained from her face didn't come back. Dad, I love you, I said. That's true, and it doesn't stop being true. But love and forgiveness are two different things, and you don't get to decide the timeline on the second one just because you're ready to move on. I straightened my clip-on tie. Enjoy the rest of your wedding, sweetheart, I said. Ethan's a good man. Be good to him. And I walked away from the table. Thompson caught me near the exit, just inside the lobby, while Emily went ahead to get her wrap from the coat check. He extended his hand. I shook it. I hope that wasn't overstepping, he said. You mean publicly revealing my career history to 200 people at my daughter's wedding? He held my gaze, unsure. It wasn't, I said. Thank you. I mean that. He nodded, visibly relieved. Answer deserved to be said out loud at least once. I've owed that to the work for 11 years. How did you even remember the name? Because it was that good, he said simply. You don't forget architecture that clean. Our engineers talked about it for years. He tilted his head slightly. She didn't know. No. Does that bother you? That she spent all this time not knowing? I considered that honestly. It would have bothered me more if she'd known and still done it, I said. Thompson was quiet for a moment. Then, what did she say when she came over? She apologized. And I told her I couldn't forgive her. Not tonight. He looked at me steadily, not with surprise. More like recognition, the look of a man who has watched enough of life to understand what that kind of decision costs. She's going to come back, he said, when the dust settles. She'll want to fix it. Maybe, I said. But wanting to fix something and actually fixing it are two different things. She's got a lot of ground to cover before we get there. I put on my jacket. If we get there. When you're ready to stop being quiet about what you built, he said. Call me. No pressure. Just the option exists. I took the card and put it in my pocket. Emily appeared at my elbow, wrap over her shoulders, reading my face the way she'd been reading it for 19 years. Ready? She said. Yeah. We walked out into the April night. The air was cool and clean, and the parking lot was quiet, most of the guests still inside. Our footsteps were the only sound until we reached the F-150 and I unlocked it, and we both got in. Emily didn't speak until I started the engine. She came over, she said. She did. What did she say? I told her I loved her, and that I couldn't forgive her. Not tonight. Emily was still for a long moment. The heater ran. The dashboard lights glowed orange. Good, she said quietly. You're not going to tell me I was too hard on her? No. You're not going to say she's young. She made a mistake. Michael. Emily turned to look at me directly. She rehearsed that speech. She chose every word. She stood at a microphone you paid for and told 200 people her father was someone to be pitied. Her voice didn't rise. It just got more precise. She didn't trip and fall into that. She walked there deliberately, and she would have walked away clean if Thompson hadn't been in that room. I pulled out of the parking lot. She cried. I said. She got caught, Emily said. And then she got scared, and then she cried. That's not the same as understanding what she did. She paused. Maybe one day she'll get there. But that's her work to do, not yours. The highway opened up in front of us, the city lights orange on either side, the road long and familiar, and mine. I drove in silence for a while, the F-150 running steady the way it always did, reliable in the particular way of things that have never once pretended to be something they aren't. I thought about a second-hand laptop and a public library, about $42,000 in a birthday card envelope, about a speech delivered with a pleasant smile to a room full of people who laughed at the right moments. I thought about the look on Sophia's face when I said no. Not anger, not satisfaction, just the particular quiet of a man who has finally, completely, put something down. Some weights, I thought, you carry because you love the person, and some weights you set down for exactly the same reason. Sophia called on a Tuesday morning in October. I was at my desk. The coffee was bad. The morning was quiet. I looked at the name on my phone for a long moment. Then the following Monday. Each time I watched the phone, and each time I let it ring. Not because I was performing. Not to make a point. But because I had nothing to say yet that was worth saying, and I'd lived long enough to know the difference between a wound that had healed and a wound that had just stopped bleeding. The voicemails accumulated. I didn't delete them. I didn't listen to them either. Ethan texted me in November. A short, careful message. Michael, I know things are difficult right now. I want you to know I'm sorry for my part in not seeing what was happening. Sophia is working on it. She's really working on it. I read it twice. I respected him for sending it. I didn't respond. My mother Ava called me every Sunday, as she always had, and we talked about the warehouse and the truck and what Emily was cooking. One Sunday in December, she said quietly, she called me, you know. Sophia. I know. She asked me to talk to you. I figured. I told her, Ava said, that you'd come around when you were ready and not a moment before. That's always been who you are. What did she say? She cried. Ava said, good. I laughed despite myself. Emily and I had Christmas quietly that year. Just the two of us, which suited us both. I cooked the turkey badly, as I had every Christmas for 19 years. And Emily fixed it without comment, as she had every Christmas for 19 years. We watched a game, and she fell asleep on the couch, and I put a blanket over her and sat in the quiet house thinking about the year. Thompson called in January. Not about a job, just to talk, which surprised me. He'd been thinking about Anshore again, he said, about the second-generation systems built on top of it. There were conversations happening at Meridian Capital about a new initiative, and my name had come up not from him but from one of their architects who'd been living inside the Anchor framework for 5 years, and wanted to talk to the person who originally built it. We talked for an hour. It was the best professional conversation I'd had in years. In February, I listened to Sophia's voicemails, all of them, sitting in my truck in the warehouse parking lot on a Tuesday lunch break with my turkey sandwich untouched on the seat beside me. The first few were formal, practiced, the cadence of someone who had rehearsed. Dad, I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. I want to talk when you're ready. The later ones were different. The one from November, 11 weeks after the wedding. Dad, I keep thinking about what you said, that I only apologized because Thompson was there. And I keep trying to prove to myself that that's not true. And I can't. A long pause. I can't prove it's not true. And that's the most honest thing I've told you in a long time. The last one, from 2 weeks ago. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I know I don't get to set the timeline. I wanted you to hear my voice. I wanted you to know I'm still here. Another pause. The sound of someone gathering themselves. I understand if the answer is still no. I just needed you to know that I understand why. I sat with that for a long time. Then I put the truck in gear, drove back into the lot, and went back to work. I didn't call her back. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Maybe not ever. I genuinely didn't know. What I knew was that forgiveness, real forgiveness, wasn't something I was going to manufacture to make someone else comfortable. It would come when it came, if it came, on its own timetable and no one else's. Until then, I had my warehouse, my turkey sandwich. My wife, who was right about most things and had the patience of a woman who had long ago decided I was worth the trouble. I had my truck, which started every morning without complaint, and never once pretended to be something it wasn't. And I had Anchor, still out there, humming quietly inside 11 distribution networks, doing what it was built to do, not asking for anyone's recognition. Just like its builder. Some men flip tables when they've been wronged. I just close the ledger and go back to work. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.